everyone, and thank you for joining us today for this conversation about monarch butterflies and other important pollinators. We're very fortunate to be joined today by two people at the forefront of this effort, Oregon's own Senator Jeff Merkley and the Xerces Society's Sarina Jepsen. Thank you both very much for being here today. My name is Bob Lee, and I'm the General Curator at the Oregon Zoo, and we're hosting this discussion today from the Oregon Zoo's Butterfly Conservation Lab. Now, this lab is a very special place at the Oregon Zoo, and it's kind of a hidden place. You're not going to see it on the main path. But despite its clinical setting, you might say it's a magical place because some truly incredible transformations happen here every day. For more than 20 years, our staff has worked closely with partners to save the Oregon silver spot butterfly and the Taylor's checker spot butterfly from extinction. Right now, behind me in those refrigerators in the corner, there's an epic butterfly slumber party going on. And we don't want to disturb them, so we'll show you some pre-recorded footage of what's going on. Thousands of larvae or caterpillars are taking a long nap in a cold environment that simulates our Oregon winters. In a few weeks, they'll wake up, they'll eat, grow extremely fast, and then we'll be able to release them in a few protected habitats in Oregon and Washington, where they'll turn into butterflies and help create the next generation. The parents of these caterpillars were collected from the wild and laid their eggs in the safety of this lab. And because of that, their larvae will have a better chance at survival. It's painstaking work, but it's making a difference. If not for these recovery efforts, 3 of the remaining silver spot populations would probably be extinct. Now, these 2 species were once common along our coastal headlands and prairies. And butterflies hold a deep meaning for so many of us around the world. There's no better way to get and feel connected to the natural world than see a butterfly flutter by on a bright sunny day as you're taking a hike in the park. But they're also part of a broader group of insect pollinators that are key to the health of the habitats we share and to our food supply. But many of these pollinators are in trouble. Because of their complex life cycles and interdependent relationships with plants, butterflies are especially vulnerable to habitat loss, toxins, invasive species, and climate change. So today we're going to explore how the Western monarch butterflies come so close to extinction, and most importantly, what we can do to save them. We're very fortunate to have 2 champions of pollinator conservation with us today. Oregon's United States Senator Jeff Merkley has long been a champion of pollinators. He has introduced bipartisan legislation that would protect habitats for monarchs and all the other pollinators our farmers, our agricultural industry, and our food supply rely on. And as the new chair of the Senate Appropriations Subcommittee that funds the Department of the Interior, Senator Merkley is in a powerful position to continue helping these vital species. And Sarina Jepsen directs the Endangered Species Program at the Xerces Society, a science-based organization focused on invertebrate conservation, where she has worked to protect and recover endangered pollinators since 2006. Sarina oversees several pollinator community science projects, including the Western Monarch Thanksgiving Count, which some of you may have been involved in. This program engages volunteers to track the Western monarch population for more than 2 decades. And the data from this count has highlighted a 99.9% decline in migratory Western monarch butterflies and has been used by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to evaluate the monarch's extinction risk. Each of our guests plays a unique and critical role in conserving butterflies, science, and policy. So for today's conversation, I'm going to ask our guests 3 questions each, to be followed by some questions from you in the audience. So please post your questions in the Facebook comments section, and we'll select some for the panel to answer. So Sarina, I'm going to start with you. The monarch is one of the world's most celebrated and best known butterflies. So it may come as a surprise to a lot of our viewers that the Western population is so dangerously close to extinction. What led to this decline, and what does it mean for the species?
Yeah, thanks, Bob. First, let me take a step back and explain that monarchs overwinter primarily in 2 places. They'll migrate from the eastern US to the mountains of central Mexico, and in the western US, they primarily migrate to coastal California. We're able to estimate the size of their populations each winter when they cluster in forested groves in each of these places. And there used to be hundreds of millions of monarchs overwintering in Mexico, but their population has declined by about 80% since the early 1990s. And the migratory monarch population of the western US, which numbered in the millions in the 1980s, has been reduced to less than 2,000 butterflies this winter, a decline of more than 99.9%. In Pacific Grove, California, which is also known as Butterfly Town, USA, for its spectacular monarch overwintering sites, the monarchs didn't show up at all this year. And in Washington state, there was just one wild monarch reported last summer. There are several factors contributing to the monarch's decline, from habitat loss, pesticide use, to climate change and disease. Habitat loss includes both the loss of milkweed plants that the monarch caterpillars eat, as well as the loss of other wildflowers whose nectar fuels their migration. And of particular concern for the Western population, especially, is the loss and degradation of the monarch's forested overwintering habitat. In California, we know that more than 60 overwintering sites have been destroyed and another 51 are currently threatened. Pesticide use is also contaminating milkweed throughout the monarch's breeding range. A recent study conducted by University of Nevada, Reno scientists, as well as Xerces Society scientists in California, found 64 different pesticides and milkweeds collected from farms, natural areas, backyards, and even plants, milkweed plants purchased from nurseries, including several compounds that we know are toxic to monarchs. So we're really on the verge of losing the monarch migration. The monarchs that migrate throughout Western states could disappear in just a few years. If we want to live in a world where monarch butterflies exist, there's a need to restore habitat on a massive scale. And in the Western US, we need to protect and improve the monarch butterflies' overwintering habitat and restore native milkweeds and wildflowers to the areas where monarchs breed. We also need to make a significant change in our pesticide use practices and certainly to address climate change.
Wow, those statistics are just mind-blowing, the numbers and how they've dropped. Thank you for that, Sarina. So, Senator, I'm going to turn to you. You've long been a champion for pollinators. How has the plight of the monarch butterfly propelled efforts in Congress to take action?
Well, I'll tell you, Bob, it hasn't propelled enough action. The action should have happened 20 years ago, 10 years ago. Here we are, and I think the numbers Sarina just shared with us just are stunning. A 99.9% drop. So this is not just a 5-alarm fire, it's something beyond that. And so action is so important so quickly and broadly for pollinators. Of course, our bee population has been experiencing all kinds of challenges. Pollinators are an invaluable component of food systems around the globe and certainly here in the US. A third of the United States food supply is made possible through pollination, including many of Oregon's specialty crops, blueberries, marionberries, my favorite, raspberries, pears. According to the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations, up to 5 billion of annual food production worldwide relies directly on pollinators. And honeybees and monarch butterflies or pollinators have been, as Sarina pointed out, alarming decline. They weren't helped in the last administration. As the population was plummeting, they were just left to fend for themselves. The Trump administration defied science and denied critical protections to the monarch butterfly under the Endangered Species Act. I hope to see that change this year. I'm just hoping it isn't too late. And of course, there are some populations that are still there and we've got to save them. And we hope we can restore the ones that Sarina was describing as really already in complete collapse. We were kind of, when I first started talking about this, it's like, we got to prevent the collapse. And now it's here. I must say that the administration failed to act, the Trump administration failed to act, even after the administration itself had estimated 96% chance of population collapse for the Western monarch, which is overwintering, as she pointed out, on the Pacific coast. So I have joined with Jimmy Panetta to introduce my Monarch Act to provide funding to actively restore and protect key monarch and other pollinator habitats on the Pacific coast and across the West. And I'll share a little bit more in regard to some other questions you might be asking.
Thank you, Senator. I appreciate all your efforts to save these species. Sarina, the Senator brought up a good point that the monarch butterflies are among the many pollinators that call our region home. How important are these pollinators to agriculture and the health of the environment? And from your perspective, what's at stake if we don't take action for their survival?
Yeah. Wild pollinators are absolutely essential to sustaining both agriculture and the native ecosystems throughout the world. Animals like bees, butterflies, beetles, and flies pollinate more than 85% of all flowering plants, also enabling these plants to produce fruits and seeds that feed songbirds, grizzly bears, and countless other animals with whom we share this world. As Senator Merkley noted, about a third of all food crops are insect pollinated, but beyond that, most of the vitamins and minerals that make up a healthy diet with foods like blueberries, tomatoes, and apples come from insect pollinated plants. While most native insect pollinators have not been sufficiently studied to know which ones are in trouble, the information that we do have is really concerning. We know from research by Xerces scientists and some of our partner scientists that approximately 1/4 of all North American bumblebee species face extinction risk. The Western bumblebee used to be one of the 3 most common bumblebees pollinating crops and wildflowers here in the Willamette Valley of Oregon, and yet now it is no longer found west of the Cascades in this state. Franklin's bumblebee, which used to occur in Southern Oregon, has not been seen since 2006. We also know that several butterfly species, in addition to monarch butterflies, are at risk of extinction. Just over a week ago, a new study was published in the journal Science that found that the abundance of butterflies in the West has been declining at the alarming rate of 1.6% each year. The study highlighted several species of butterfly in addition to the monarchs that are facing extinction risk. And many of these other endangered pollinators would benefit from efforts to restore habitat for the monarch butterfly that have been proposed in the Monarch Act. If we don't take bold action to address the threats that native pollinators face, we risk impacts to both our food security as well as the stability of our native ecosystems. And in other parts of the world, we have seen plants disappear with the loss of their pollinators.
Thank you, Sarina. Senator Merkley, you talked a little bit about this before, but what actions have already been taken to protect and conserve monarch butterflies, and what other actions are needed?
Well, the most important development, I think, is that the Fish and Wildlife agencies in the Western North America got together and developed a monarch butterfly conservation plan and released it in 2019. And it really lays out an all hands on deck approach to establish habitat conservation goals and strategies to rebuild monarch population. As Sarina was talking about, we're losing place after place after place. My understanding, and you correct me if I'm wrong, it takes 3 generations of the Western monarch to get as far north as Oregon, and I think 1 generation to return south. I mean, it's a miracle. How do each of those locations have the monarch know what to do? But they've been doing it for a hell of a long time until we interrupted the locations and the food sources and assaulted them with pesticides. I mean, I'm really hoping that the ideas that have come from the experts on reestablishing milkweed, reestablishing habitat, reducing the contamination of that habitat with pesticides can restore this miraculous creature. And it's a symbol of our ability to be decent stewards. But that Western monarch butterfly conservation plan hasn't been funded. So we've got to do that. And that's where the Monarch Act comes in that I've been championing. It authorizes $62 million for the Department of Interior to facilitate this plan. It's allocated over 5 annual installments. I want to keep modifying the effort according to what people think is needed. If it needs more than that, let's get more than that. I mean, we just had a bill go through here that is a massive bill that spends $1.9 trillion. Surely we can allocate the millions of dollars needed to save the monarch. The other bill that I put forward was the Monarch and Pollinator Highway Act. And this came out of a conversation with Lamar Alexander about a program they had in Tennessee, where they essentially organized groups to do plots of flowers and milkweed along their state highways. And different groups would take on the projects. And I thought, well, why can't we use the sides of our highways and establish plots of, every mile or so of pollinator habitat, not mow them, not disturb them, mark them, have people take local pride in them. And, one of the things I hope to see happen in a hearing this year is find out from the experts, will this help? One of the senators I was talking to who was very interested in this said, What about the conservation plans we have with farmers where they leave certain land undisturbed for conservation? Could that also be planted with pollinators and with flowers for pollinators and milkweed for monarchs? Because those are huge plots of land. They're also, any pointed out, they're not near a highway, so they don't get struck by a car. Well, that was a good point. If I can engage a Republican in that dialogue and create a bipartisan push and bring in other ideas, let's do it. So let's get the experts testifying. Let's get the school children doing monarch projects to highlight the plight we're facing, fund the best ideas, and get it done.
Thank you, Senator. We really appreciate your work in Washington to make create habitats for these butterflies and pollinators to continue to survive. But I know, Sarina, a lot of folks that are watching us today are going to be asking, what is it that I can do? I live in an apartment, downtown, or I have a house with a big yard, and I live among pollinators, and I want to help. So can you talk a little bit about what actions that we can take in our homes and neighborhoods to make it more pollinator friendly?
Sure, yeah. The good news is that there are so many things that each of us can do to help butterflies, bees, and other pollinators. If you live somewhere where you have access to soil or even the ability to put some pots outside, you can provide habitat for bees, butterflies, and other insects. Planting native milkweeds in the areas where they historically grew is a great strategy to bring back monarch butterflies. And planting other native wildflowers that bloom throughout the year, including the host plants for caterpillars of other butterflies, will sustain a variety of pollinators. Don't use pesticides, and if you can, buy food that was produced without pesticides. If you're purchasing plants to create pollinator habitat, ask about the pesticides that were used in producing them and ensure that those plants are free of systemic insecticides like neonicotinoids that are toxic to bees and butterflies and can persist in plants and soil for years. Also, you can join a community science project to track the status of pollinators, and the information you collect will inform conservation. For example, the Western Monarch Milkweed Mapper crowdsources photos of monarchs and milkweed from throughout the Western US, and the data collected by the participants directly inform restoration strategies for Western monarchs. Similarly, you can sign up for a program like Bumblebee Watch to take pictures of bumblebees and share them. These observations are used by conservation biologists to better understand and conserve endangered bumblebees. Lastly, you can advocate for pollinator-friendly policies in the community where you live. Many cities and towns have already changed their local policies to better protect pollinators by becoming a bee city, restricting the use of insecticides that are toxic to pollinators, or investing in pollinator habitat and public green spaces. You can ask your elected officials to support policies that will help pollinators, like Senator Merkley is doing here.
Senator Merkley, I'm going to go back to you. Sarina gave us some great advice on how we can all be better neighbors to pollinators. Now, you've just heard a big focus on how people can improve habitats where they live. What can the federal government do to improve habitats for pollinators across the country?
Well, what they can do is provide grants through the Department of Transportation to states who will implement plans. Those availability of those grants will allow people in the state to advocate for local plans, to design those plans with the expertise of those who, like Sarina, who know what exactly is needed. And of course, that will involve the things we've been talking about, saving habitat, planting habitat, making sure it's not disturbed or mowed at the wrong point in time, so on and so forth. Monitoring the outcomes to see what works and what doesn't, so we can do more of what works best. So I'd say that kind of sums it up.
That's great. Thank you both for all of your responses. And while we've been speaking, we've been pulling questions from the audience. And so we're going to turn to the audience and allow them to ask. The first one is for you, Sarina. Faye asks, what can individuals who are probably in neighborhoods with low awareness of this issue do to create a world where monarch butterflies have a chance?
Sorry, you said what can people in neighborhoods with low awareness of this issue?
Yes, exactly. Yes. What can they do to create a world where monarch butterflies will have a chance?
Yeah, I mean, given that monarchs, at least historically, were really distributed through most of the United States, I think planting native milkweed in your neighborhood almost anywhere is a good strategy to support monarch butterflies.
Great. Okay. And one more for you, Sarina. Barbara asks, are the eastern and western monarchs two distinct species?
No, they are the same. They both belong to the same subspecies of monarch, Danaeus plexippus plexippus, and they are not distinct. They have different migratory behaviors, but there's intermixing between the populations, and extensive studies have not found them to be distinct.
Great. Thank you so much. Well, that's all the time we have today. So I want to give a huge thank you to Senator Jeff Merkley and Sarina Jepsen for sharing your time and expertise with us today.
You're welcome. Pleasure to be with you all, and for everyone listening. This is a great project for your community, your neighborhood association, Boy Scout troop, Girl Scout troop, almost any club, to pick a plot of land, plant some milkweed, learn about this, educate others. We really is the moment that if we don't act decisively, aggressively, passionately right now, we will have lost the monarch, and we just can't let that happen. So thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Sarina, thank you as well.
Thank you for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. And I also want to thank all of our viewers who tuned in, as well as all the people and organizations out there working to protect pollinators and the habitat we all depend on. Now, we'll put some links up in a moment where you can voice your support for protecting monarch butterflies and their habitat. And we'll also post this video on the Oregon Zoo YouTube channel. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today, and be safe out there.
Take care. Thank you.